mean, I also don't particularly like the term empowerment.
Yeah, women
Because,
empowerment.
yeah, because, I mean, I don't think that like we as an organization, we have some kind of power to actually empower them. Women are empowered in themselves.
Tea garment or leather or say tea plantation, I think so. These women workers who are employed there in the grassroots level, their work from the grassroots till the processing part, their work remains unseen. I mean, invisible. So that is their
yeah,
dignity is lowered there. No,
feminism is not about women defeating men. It is about questioning the structure. It's about questioning the system. Because patriarchy harms men as much as it harms women.
welcome viewers to my podcast. Today I take the opportunity of introducing a lady uh, who's been working for quite some years with the labor section, I mean the workers of the society, especially the women. She is engaged with students, researchers and faculty on themes such as care economy, then called invisible labor and gender inequality. Yes, she is Ashmita Sharma. Presently, she holds the position of a executive director in the Society for Labor and Development. Welcome, Ms. Sharma, to my podcast. It's nice to have you here today with me.
Thank you so much for giving me this opportunity.
Thank you. What it exactly feels like to be a woman?
I think this is a very difficult and rather a very heavily loaded question, but I would still, I mean, of course, I would still love to answer because it also means, or it has had, multiple experiences for me as well over the years that I've grown up. So I would like to begin with a very simple quote by Simone de Beauvoir, who was a French philosopher and a feminist icon. So she, in her book, The Second Sex, she said that one is not born, but rather becomes a woman. Now that is, again, a very deceptively simple sentence, but it has a lot of, deeply sociological and philosophical meaning. So what she means by this is that the biological sex is something that is assigned to one at birth. But when you say what it means to become a woman, that is deeply shaped and influenced by the society.
Exactly.
By the structures around us, by institutions, by relationships, by expectations, family, marriage, and a plethora of things that exist. So, I think that, I mean, there is no one single experience of being a woman like that. And interestingly, like by the time one really grows up to sort of realize what you want to figure out for yourself as a woman in life.
Proud and taller to be a woman.
Exactly. But by that time, I think society had already written a script for you. And I mean, that's why I feel that the experience of being a woman is deeply shaped by various intersections of caste, of class, of religion, gender, age, disability, region, I mean, many other things.
Many other sectors are there.
Exactly. So, and I think for me, like, when I started figuring out how I would like to experience womanhood, I think this is my experience of, so my experience of womanhood is basically mine, yours is yours, somebody else's would be somebody else's. But all of this is equally true. And that's why when you ask me, like my experience of, or how it feels to be a woman, I mean, there's no one straight, clear-cut answer. But what I would like to say is that my experience has been deeply shaped by my mother. She was a beautiful, kind, and extraordinarily powerful woman. Like, she was powerful in her own ways. And I think whatever she taught me throughout, that has stayed with me. And I mean, she did not sit me down to say that, this is this and this is that. But she lived a kind of life which,
She wanted.
exactly, and which really taught me like what is it to experience womanhood in life. I mean, there are a few valuable learnings that I take from her, and one of, or a couple of them is, I mean, she always told me that you have to be fearless in life and always stand your ground. She taught me to speak up against anything that was wrong, not just for yourself but also for people around you. And there was one thing that she taught me, which I mean didn't make sense before, but this is something that makes sense now as I grow up. She told me that you have to be kind, but you don't necessarily have to be nice. And I think there is a world of difference
Difference
between,
between the two, yes.
what
Being kind
kind and being
nice.
nice. And always, like, as I was growing up, I thought it was the same one and the same thing, but then I realized that no, it is not. I think kindness, I mean, niceness, I think is when you are nice, you be nice so that you are able to keep the peace around you. So that there is no, I mean, there's no form of discomfort, or you are nice because you don't want to disappoint the other person. But kindness is more powerful because I think at times you want to also, or you have to rather sometimes disrupt the peace, or you have to be honest so that, like, even if you were to say no, you have to say that no so that you are honest to yourself and to people around you.
Not going against your
Exactly.
consciousness.
And also against your principles, your values. But that doesn't make you any less kinder, I would say. And this is something that has stayed with me, and I've always tried to practice this value and this principle in life. Because if you look around you, and if you look at women generally, we're always taught by, I mean, like, the society expects you to be something or somebody you might not want to be. Be, I mean, like, something like simple as, be kind, but don't be too emotional. That is what, it is told of women. Be ambitious, but don't be intimidating. Keep the peace, choose peace over happiness. Be confident, but don't be difficult. So these are some of the things that are expected of a woman. And I think this is where, my mother's role becomes extremely instrumental, in the sense that she taught me some of the ways of life through practice. And during my academic journey, when I got myself enrolled in Tata Institute of Social Sciences, Mumbai, in the Gender Studies course, I think, like, all these experiences came live to me, because through that particular discipline, I was able to give a language or vocabulary to all these experiences that I have lived with for so many years. And I mean, like, and then I started, I think my mother also helped me question some of these existing societal expectations, which we otherwise, take it for granted.
Exactly.
So something as simple as, why is it expected of women, or, you have to accommodate, like, you have to accommodate everything in life. Basically, to say that as a person, you need to adjust. So this is something that is always there, and that is something that is always expected. It's like an unsaid norm. So these were some things that I really learned to challenge. I really learned to question during my days in TIS. And like a very interesting example that I would like to give from my, those years is I went to Brindavan for my master's
Yeah, I'll ask you about
thesis.
that. I was just thinking of
Yeah,
during your
so-
research books. Yeah?
Yes,
That would be a different thing for you.
yeah.
Before we go to Brindavan, let me ask you one question. Not question exactly. You were born and brought up in a small town in Upper Assam, Dumduma. Thereon, where you did your preschooling. Later on, you moved on to Digboy Carmel, where you ended up with class 10th standard. Thereon, you moved on to Bombay,
Delhi and
Delhi,
then,
and then Bombay.
yes.
So, and you have been working for the social welfare of the society. What made you choose this path? Were you motivated that you got engaged into this? Because you have been constantly working, especially for the women section of the society.
Yeah.
Or you just,
Or
you,
did
what
I
was
just
your
go-
focus? No,
did I just
not
go with the flow?
no, not with the flow exactly. I mean, were you focused?
I think I was always because again, like this particular question of yours would be very related to the previous
Yeah.
that I was answering, and particularly because from the very beginning, I have been very conscious of the injustices around me.
That is what I wanted to know. There's something that must be there, no?
Yes,
That
a
made you
motivating
focus with it.
factor.
Yes.
Yeah, right. So that is what like drove me to like when I went to Delhi. Also, I pursued political science, and then of course that was my I did my majors in political
Yes.
science. But then
That
I
was
had
your
a
subject.
course which I audited, which was called Women in Practice. So there also I learned a lot of the theoretical and the practical perspectives that help me also put some of the experiential learnings from my childhood until I reached the classroom where these concepts were taught. And then finally to Mumbai, obviously I enrolled myself in gender studies, and that was a complete discipline in itself. And then, like here, the experience, my research experience of working with the widows become very crucial because, my thesis was about understanding their life, their challenges, their aspirations.
Yeah, you had been in Brindavan, no, with the
Yes.
widows when you were doing your research
Exactly.
papers, engaged in research papers.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I thought of, like initially I thought of documenting the life of a widow.
We hear so many things about the widows.
Yeah. And then when I went there,
Is their
I-
condition pathetic?
yes, I'm just
To some
coming to
extent,
that.
I think,
Yeah.
isn't it?
So when I went there, I realized that my research question of documenting the life of a widow, that fell flat because they did not have any one single experience.
Okay.
So, for example, a widow was, for example, she was also a mother. She was also somebody's daughter. At some point, somebody's partner slash wife. She was also a worker. Also, somebody with a lot of, maybe the conditions did not allow, but somebody with a lot of dreams, with a lot of aspirations. Somebody who had also made a lot of sacrifices in life. So basically, like all experiences put together was this particular person or this particular woman. So that also taught me a lot of things because if I were to, for example, reduce the life of a woman to a single identity, saying that, into a homogeneous category of being a woman, then I would have also reduced my understanding of looking at their life in its entirety. So, so there I learned a lot of things of how do you actually look or
What you see from outside is
Yeah.
not what exactly is
correct.
inside the inner picture of the.
Exactly. And because I
Of
think
their life, I
also you as Mayuri, you would have a lot of experiences, not just a single identity, right?
They are put there, I believe, maybe abandoned by whom?
Yeah, yeah.
By their sons.
And some also
By family, I mean. Home
exactly
means by family.
yeah, but some
Or some
had
do
also
come willingly, I think.
yeah, some had also like it would also be wrong to say that everybody who were abandoned wanted to come to Vrindavan because they were pushed to abjection, but
Yes.
some had also exercised their own agency to decide that I would want to live here because
Yes.
once you are, let's say, a widow, even if you were not, let's say, pushed out of your home, but if what if you were, you know, you are a single woman at the end of the day. Even as a widow, you are a single woman. And at this also, I would like to look at the definition of single woman also a bit critically, not that somebody who's only unmarried, but somebody without a partner or a spouse or living life on her own terms or on their own terms is also a single woman.
Yes.
So that is something that may have, had to play a part in them deciding to move to a space where they met more women of their kind so that they could also live, life in a community of other women
Okay.
rather than, living on their own.
On their own, alone, being isolated or
Exactly,
something like that.
because that didn't feel isolated, that didn't feel excluded, because you had many others who shared your experiences, shared your miseries, or even like good times that you must have had in that entire
They feel the
period of
comfort
your
there, being with
exactly,
each other.
despite all the challenges.
Yes, yes. So, this is Asmita Sharma at One Part. So now, let us come, we'll be talking about your organization, Society for Labor and Development.
Yeah,
So let me call out in short SLD. Otherwise, I have to keep on reading the line again and again over.
that's fine.
No, SLD has been working for, even you all have been working in the international platform, I believe. So, and your organization is not confined to a particular boundary. So, what you call, if I talk about women, their livelihood, their work, how do you extend it to the global platform?
So basically, our organization was founded in 2006, and we are celebrating 20 years of our work this
Yes.
year, this month, on the 31st of August. So, so basically, when the organization was founded, we started working with garment workers in the Haryana region of Delhi NCR. Because the reason being, we wanted to basically work along the garment global supply chain. So starting from brands to suppliers to workers, what are basically the different conduits where power is exercised and how, like, ultimately the brunt of everything, falls on the working population who are basically producing your garments on the production line. So that has been the genesis of SLD's work. So we started working there, and simultaneously, a few years down the line, I think 2012, if I'm not wrong, we also started working with domestic workers. Domestic workers, I mean, like women who work.
That means women working in different sectors.
Exactly.
As you said, garment, then about domestic workers.
Right.
So their voices to be brought into limelight. There are different ways for different, not ways exactly. All of them have to undergo different sort of problems exactly.
Correct.
Like I've just disturbed you in the middle.
No, it's not.
So like we find that we are talking about garment industry, big garment or leather or say tea plantation. I think so. These women workers who are employed there in the grassroots level, they work from the grassroots till the processing part. Their work remains unseen. I mean invisible. So that is their dignity is lowered there, no?
Exactly. So
Yes.
basically, why we also work, I mean, I'll just go back to the point where I finished.
You were talking about garment.
Yeah, so garment and then domestic workers, because like Gurgaon at that point was coming up with huge buildings and skyscrapers, and also a lot of industries, garment industries and other allied industries as well. So the need for domestic workers also increased in people's houses and offices, right? because domestic work is also part of the larger care economy. And so what we realize is most of the workers who are still working in the garment industry, they're all migrants from UP, from Bihar, and then many other states nearby. And what we realized is a garment worker was not purely a garment worker. A garment worker also worked as a domestic worker in somebody else's house.
House, okay.
So their workplace was not just the factory floor, but also the house of their own employer. So technically, there were two workplaces.
Two workplaces for
them. So, which is why we started working with domestic workers as well, so that we also understood their lived experience and their working conditions in a holistic manner. And like you rightly pointed out, that the life and the work of these women workers is largely invisible, because like the entire production is done by them. But by the time it reaches the customers who buy the clothes, now it is the tag of the brand, like whichever.
Ultimately, name goes to the brand.
Exactly,
If
but
it's
none
a
is
factory, it
attributed.
may be at the owner.
Exactly.
Be it garment, it's the designer. Somehow or the other,
Exactly.
the creamy layer gets the name.
Exactly.
Name and
So
fame.
nothing is attributed to or credited to the working class.
Working class. They are deprived.
They are deprived.
But without them, these sectors cannot work.
Yeah, without them, the entire economy, I think, the entire industry, the entire economy cannot sustain. Like even domestic workers, for instance, like our lives would come to a standstill if domestic workers did not come to our houses.
Yes, exactly.
I mean, they somehow or somewhere they subsidize our lives so that we are able to go to our work.
Our work, yes, exactly.
And lead our professional lives, seamlessly.
It seems life becomes impossible if without them.
Yeah,
without
exactly.
The domestic workers.
Exactly. And like, just to give you an example, let's say now a worker who's, let's say, migrated from Bihar to work in the garment industry in Haryana, Gurgaon. Now and she comes here to find employment because there's nothing back home. So once she comes here, it's not just about coming and finding work. It's also having to find a house, a rented place where you would stay.
Yes.
Now the rent might be exorbitantly high for the amount that you are really earning earning by working as a garment worker. So, and then whatever you earn, you might not have control over your income. And then once you go to your workplace, which is the garment factory, your body, your life, your well-being is entirely controlled by your employer.
Yes.
I mean, either the management or the brands or whoever is your employer or the contractor.
Yes.
And then when you go there, you experience, let's say, some form of sexual harassment at the workplace. Even if you wanted to raise a voice, you are unable to because of many other multiple factors.
Ultimately, you are suppressed.
Yeah, which don't allow you to raise a voice. I mean, you never know that the person who is harassing you is actually also controlling your wages and your working conditions.
So ultimately, it's like, if you raise your voice, you will be deprived from going to your workplace.
Yeah, you might be blacklisted in the industry. You might lose your job. Then who feeds your family? So there are a lot of things. Just to say that why didn't you report this case of violence is not enough, because
there are so many factors.
Yes. Because I think it's not, I don't think, but it's the fact that it's not, women are not failing, but systems are failing women. I think that is very important for us to realize. Rather than
everywhere you find somehow or the other, dignity is lower.
Exactly.
Those who are strong enough, I would like to say, strong in the sense, some of them are able to come out of that, but not basically all.
And I think
raise their voice, as you're saying, about raising their voice.
And also I think these women do have a lot of, courage. They do have a lot of strength. They do have a lot of knowledge about their lives, which is why, I also don't particularly like the term empowerment,
Yeah, women
Because
empowerment.
yeah, because I mean, I don't think that like we as an organization, we have some kind of power to actually empower them. Women are empowered in themselves. But what I would like to say is, I think the enabling conditions to let them express or to enable them to express how powerful they are, or or how they can basically exercise control or agency over their lives. So those conditions are missing, which is stopping them from doing certain things.
Now, if you come to say since earlier days, if I talk about, but if you compare earlier times with now, much changes have come up in the lives of women. Not, I cannot say that they have their livelihood haven't changed, but still, if you look from the feministic point of view, there still exists gender inequality. What would you like to say about that?
Exactly.
Because this is also one of your theme, I believe, gender
Exactly,
inequality.
exactly. So here I would like to talk about
Maybe in their wages, in their workplace, women
or
are
just
somehow,
basic life
yeah,
conditions. I think here I would like to talk about the concept of intersectionality, which Kimberly Crenshaw, she very beautifully brought up this theoretical concept of intersectionality, where she says that the discrimination or the oppression that you face has intersecting elements, in the sense that, if, for example, the kind of discrimination that a middle class urban woman living in, let's say, Delhi would face, would be very different from Dalit agricultural woman worker from Bihar, because you don't have equal opportunities. Or even if you had equal opportunities, you don't have the equal access to resources or equal access to those opportunities. For example, again, like I did, again, back in Mumbai, I was working with slum dwellers, basically trying to understand their idea of housing, their life, their experiences as workers, and also as strong women trying to resist or even confront structures around them that made them deprived and basically feel meaningless in life. There, I remember very interesting example. I mean, it's not an example. It's something that has stayed with me. So there was a very old couple. So I had gone to interview them, and every day I would call her Nani because she was very old, and also a very strong activist on ground. So then I would every day stop by for tea. And then I happened to talk to her about how I missed home, my mother's cooking, etc. So the very next day when I went to the field, she she made egg curry for me, for everyone, for Nana, myself, and for herself as well. And then it was really nice that. And then I told her that, okay, egg is my favorite meal. So I clearly remember she made 3 eggs, and she gave me one. She kept one for herself and one for Nana. And the moment I said that this was my favorite go-to meal, she gave me her share as well. And then I told her that, no, I don't. I mean, like, you should be sharing this meal with me. Despite all my insistence, she refused, and she made sure that I eat.
you too.
But now, it was not like an extraordinarily amazing fieldwork which I did. But why did this egg curry story stay with me is because this woman, she was old. She was almost in her 75, 80 years. She was a Muslim slum dweller. She was not, I mean, of course, she's been staying in Mumbai for many years, so of course now a resident of Mumbai, but she was originally from Bihar.
Oh.
and she had very little means. But still, she made sure that whatever she gave was out of kindness. So, here, what I would like to say is that, like our personal is not just personal, but I think personal is also extremely political. Like, whatever happens in your life, your home, at your workplace, in relationships, or anywhere around you, has deep political meaning. Because I think as citizens, as people, we tend to reduce the meaning of political to only, let's say, parliamentary politics or elections. But it's not that. Like, these are deeply, these experiences have deeply political meaning, because this is something that really shapes your life and the world around you. How you make meaning of the world around you is shaped by these understanding of life and lived experiences.
You have been working even with the tea plantation. I mean, workers of tea plantation. What was your experience then with them?
My experience was good, but probably theirs was not, because but again, like there, I think the tea industry as a whole is now, has been going through a period of crisis.
Yeah, exactly.
So it is not just the worker, but I think the overall industrial setup is in disarray, which is why, like, workers who come or are at the lowest rung in the hierarchy, they obviously have to, like, pay the brunt of what is happening or in the entire tea supply chain. So their wages, working conditions, everything is in a
Yes.
very bad state.
What is your organization doing, or what do they do? How do they help? I mean, in
Our
bringing
interventions, you mean?
Yeah, their interventions at the international level or national, whatever you say. I mean, their dignity to limelight so that they come into focus.
Correct.
How do you help them?
Right. So ours is a labor rights and support organization. We work at the intersection of gender, labor, migration, ethical business practices. Because, like, of course, our organization is very deeply rooted in the grassroots. It's a very bottom-up approach that we take in to implement our interventions. But at the same time, I think SLD also acts as a bridge between the working class community and the brands or the industry representatives. So if you ask me, like, what is that one word you associate with your organization, I would call ourselves a bridge
Bridge
between the two, because we realize that if you only work, the entire burden of, let's say, deprivation or poor working conditions cannot be put on the workers. Like, somebody also has to dialogue with the management, somebody also has to dialogue with the brands, and also, like, find a middle path to how do you make your business practices more ethical, more sustainable, more gender transformative,
Yes.
so that the workplace culture gets better. And then that is in the interest of both the workers and the industry. So at SLD, we run a very interesting model called the Worker Resource Center.
Yes.
So we have our presence in almost 7 states in India. So we work in Delhi NCR, we work in UP, we work in Punjab, we work in Gujarat, North Bengal, Tamil Nadu, and Karnataka. So these are our areas of operation.
Your workplace, huh?
Yes. And we have this very interesting model called the Worker Resource Center, which is a community-based intervention model, where workers, especially like women workers, we also run like a workers' cafe. Not cafe in a traditional sense, but a space where women can come together, not just discuss their problems, but also see how to exercise their agency in the workplace, at home, in the community. Because The workplace, home, and the community are very closely interlinked. I mean, we tend to see them in isolation or as separate elements,
Yes.
but there is very close interaction and interrelationship between them. So, through our Worker Resource Center, we work on women's leadership development. We work on how do you make like grievance redressal mechanisms more effective and accessible for workers. We work on social access to social protection. We work on like various forms of capacity building exercises. Research and documentation is also an important and integral part of our work because like it is through evidence building from the ground that most of our interventions are designed and implemented in the states where we work in.
We are working.
So the Worker Resource Center model has been very crucial in amplifying workers' voice. So we also run like reading circles. We also run fellowship programs so that we are able to build leadership capacities of the children of workers as well.
You all have been doing workshops and all. I believe even in the international this thing also. You have been to many other countries as well.
Right.
Huh.
Because what we realized is that, for example, like 2 years back, I was at a decent work conference in Geneva that was organized and hosted by the International Labour Organization. Now, these are international global spaces.
That was a separate experience, I believe,
Yes,
isn't it? Yes.
exactly. And also, like, one thing is to like go to an international platform and make yourself as the leader of the organization visible.
Yes.
But the other thing is to also like carry forward the voices of workers.
To that platform.
Exactly, which otherwise would have been like excluded and isolated from these international spaces. So that was, I mean, that was the entire objective of us going and representing SLD at that platform because that helped us amplify our work, that helped us amplify workers' voices at a different level altogether. Because it's like in most of these international spaces, because of so many reasons, accessibility, you know, resources, etc., most of these grassroots organizations, they can never make it. And therefore, in most of these consultative processes, our voices are excluded.
Yes.
And like even in policy making and implementation. So that was the entire objective behind going and presenting,
Presenting.
the side of workers at that global space.
Okay, we have been so long. We have been talking about women working in different sectors, working women, workers. Now, what about women who are mothers, who are wives? At some point of their life, even their dignity, somewhere or the other, they lose themselves or they find themselves being lost somewhere. If I talk about mothers, a part of their life goes after marriage, that is, in raising their children. But at the end, which is the present scenario of today's society, maximum, they get lost somewhere. I mean, their sons, their daughters, what is their role into the life of those mothers? Almost we see that most of the mothers at their, during their old age, they end up in the old age home. So it's not comparing with the workers, but here also we see the dignity of women. Then what about wives? There are not all, if I say all, it would be wrong, but there are certain couples where wives being educated, highly educated, some of them, for some reason or the other, they bear all the traumas or all the, physical, to some extent, mental tortures from their husbands. Leave aside their in-laws, I'm talking about their husband. But still they bear everything, and it takes time for them to come out of it. And by the time they think of coming out, it's already too late. So here also, I think the respect and the dignity of a woman needs to be recognized.
Of course, I think that's a very,
I don't speak about all
It's,
sons and all daughters,
yeah,
but still,
but it's a reality.
that is the reality. A mother
mean,
gives half of her life raising her children.
Yeah, I mean, it's not,
And what at the end?
I don't think this is individual, but again, it is. This is also system. So one thing, I mean, that you rightly, I mean, you pointed out that this is not about workers, but you're talking about mothers and wives. But
Women in general.
let's not forget that unpaid care work at home is also work.
Yeah, that is also work.
So a woman is essentially working 24 into 7. So you get up in the morning, you do all your household chores, you get everything ready on the plate, you go to like whichever is your workplace. But once you come back home, you come back to your second shift.
Yeah, come back to your second shift. Again with the children.
Exactly. So
again working with the children.
what I'm trying to say is, I think there is the burden of unpaid care work disproportionately falls on women, whether it is a mother, a wife,
Yes.
a daughter. Uh, because, I mean, this is how patriarchy operates. See, feminism is not about women defeating men. It is about questioning the structure. It's about questioning the system. Because patriarchy harms men as much as it harms women. Patriarchy teaches, I mean, tells men to not be vulnerable, to be providers. Now, that is also a burden on men in themselves,
Yes.
right? But we're not talking about that aspect of patriarchy. And we are portraying feminism also in a very bad or in a very wrong light, that it is men versus women. It is not.
It is equality.
It is equality. It is the system. I think it is both men and women together. If they start questioning the system, the conditions will be much better. But that is not what, what our socializing or socialization, whether it is at home or school or college or marriage, I mean, any of these institutions have really taught us to challenge and question structures equally. I mean, redistribution of care work, I think, at home becomes very important. And the other thing that is very important and essential, I think, is institutionalizing childcare,
Yeah.
which is something that you will really see if you go to certain countries abroad, where state-sponsored childcare is very prevalent, or is the model. I mean, then we are not talking about, how much housework or care work is the husband and the wife doing. But then it becomes more in partnership, because the state is also taking care of, what happens within the four walls of the house. Because your work in the school or my work, let's say in office, is not devoid of or separated from our responsibilities back home.
Yes.
Even if I am, let's say, 5 minutes late to work, it's because something pressing had happened at home. And the burden falls on me as a woman. So, which is why I think these structures become very important, and which is why we should also start, we have now, even at SLV, we have really started working on the care economy as a system.
Yeah. You were saying that is also one of your.
It's very important to talk about unpaid care work, because this is something that is not considered as work. This is something that is expected to be a woman's responsibility by virtue of you being a woman.
Yeah.
You're supposed to do these things at home because you are a woman.
You're a woman. Yeah.
Yeah. So, but I don't understand. You can be loving, you can be caring without violating your self-worth. Without, by drawing your boundaries. Again, here I think the politics of kindness becomes very important. And why it is important for us to say no. But again, like, it's not, for example, somebody like you and me, I think we are still in a position of privilege to say no. But let's say a woman who is in a abusive relationship, she might not be in a position to say no if she has no income security,
Yeah.
if she has children at home. Where will she go?
She has no other way but to give up.
But to just be submissive.
Give herself.
Yeah, but just to give in and be
To the
submissive.
situation, huh?
Yeah, and be submissive all her life. So we can't even come and say speak up. As much as she might want to speak up, she's not able to speak up.
Speak up.
So there's
There
a
are so many other
difference.
reasons that stops her from doing that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I think it's very important, and this power, even at work, I've seen, comes only when you organize women. Only when women come together. Let's say even in your workplace, if there is a pay parity issue, if you as an individual, you speak up,
Yeah.
you might be dismissed from work. But if 20 women go together to raise the same concern to the management, then you'll see the
It's
power
more
of the
effective.
collective.
Yeah.
It is the power of collective action. So I think that power to organize, to really show that there is meaning to collective action becomes very important.
Now, you have given much of your time to me, but still, before we wind up, I would like to not ask exactly. You said that your organization will be doing some relief work for the flood affected areas here in Sivsagar. So, what have you planned for that?
So we are still discussing, having internal discussions in the organizations about this. But we are working out on a plan. So our work is going to be mostly post. It's going to be focused more on recovery than relief,
Yes.
because
Post flood.
So what happens
Post relief. I
once-
mean, after the relief,
Yeah.
not post flood exactly. Post relief.
Yeah. So basically, what happens when the floodwaters recede from your homes? So the devastation that you see at that point, and how do you rebuild your lives? I think there are a lot of organizations, a lot of NGOs, a lot of collectives, and also individuals who are doing exceptional work
Exactly.
now to basically help the flood affected areas and the survivors of this devastating
The
flood.
conditions are
But I think what is going to be
worst.
more difficult or more long term is to rebuild their lives. So, and because as an organization, we also believe in building, sustainable development models,
Okay.
which is why we have thought that we would push our focus more to recovery than to relief. So our work is going to begin in some time, because I think relief work is still happening, it's
Yeah.
still going on.
It's still going on. It's still
And I
because
think that's going to
some
take
of
a
the
while.
remote areas are still they need-
submerged.
yeah, submerged, and it will take some time.
It'll
It
take
will
some time, which is why we are also preparing ourselves to
in
understand
the
the
town
ground
areas,
better.
most of them situations are
Yeah,
quite
abysmal.
better.
Okay. Yeah,
And but
town is
remote
much
areas
better, but I think
still need
so.
some more time.
We are zeroing down on. We don't want to make very ambitious plans, because also because Assam is not one of our intervention areas yet. But through this recovery work, we hope to create or build up a long-term plan to work in Assam. Let's see. Hopefully, we are able to do it. And this work should help us, because now we're mostly trying to understand the ground situation, and what best can this intervention model look like.
So you'll take some time. Take some time in the sense after a few days, definitely.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you for joining me in the podcast.
Thank you so much.
And,
I
hope to see
really
you
enjoyed.
again.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.